In the spring of 2012, I came to Australia to give a series of talks on the new evangelization.
Something dries up if we don't speak of God.
I was addressing one of the most secularized societies in the world.
He doesn't work in the media himself when he was young.
It's the fastest growing group in Australia is no religion. Parents might still come and bring their babies for baptism, but that's the last you might see of them.
There's a quote from an Irish priest, whose name I forget. It says, it takes one generation from inadequate adult catechesis to non-church attendance, and then it only takes one more generation from non-church attendance to unbelief. In Australian history in the church, I think we're well into that second generation.
Yeah, I don't know. I used to go to church. Mum used to make me go to church. I didn't go anymore.
Like if you say I'm a Catholic and I go to Mass every Sunday, that's quite unusual.
I don't know, everyone's just kind of busy. Can find excuses easily not to go to church.
It's so hard to find God in the culture. It's so hard to find reason to believe in the culture.
This state of affairs is by no means limited to Australia, but exists across much of the Western world.
This kind of secular, aggressive atheist mentality is seeping in at a very quick rate. In the last 7 years, self-identified atheism has increased 500% in America, 5 times. Now, we're still talking about relatively small numbers, 1% to 5%, but I think that's indicative of this kind of godless mentality that's seeping in, to where people say, I don't want God to exist, therefore I'm not going to look at any real rational reasons why he possibly could. I'm just going to push him out of my life, push him out of control, and again, live my life the way I want to.
In the United States, the percentage of nones, N-O-N-E-S, those who claim no religious affiliation, has tripled in the last 30 years. In the United Kingdom, mass attendance is down to 21%. And the situation is far worse in France and Germany. Given this dire scenario, why is this man smiling? Timothy Dolan is, I think, the greatest evangelist in the church today. And the reason is that he leads with joy. It's the joy that he exhibits that leads people to say, how did he get that way? That's how you evangelize. You share the joy you find in Jesus Christ. And when people ask the reason for that joy, you're able to tell them.
It's contagious, right? Like when you're full of joy and you're full of love, whether people believe in God or not, they know that there's something about you that they kind of want, whether they recognize it or not.
All right, good. All right, thanks.
When you see zeal in a person, it gets you pumped. It gets you excited.
Let's give God a round of applause for all.
If someone comes in, hi, I'm going to church. Would you like to come with me? And, you know, they sound like they're half dead. Well, you really want to jump in the car and go with them, don't you?
Coming across as a nasty, querulous pest is not going to persuade anybody. Who wants to listen to someone who's basically saying to you, you're a rotten human being and I don't like you? I always get this thing wrong, but I always say, you know, in Scripture, it actually says you're meant to be as cunning as serpents and as gentle as doves, not as nasty as snakes and as stupid as pigeons. And that's something we should learn from.
The moment you start speaking down to younger people and young adults especially, older teenagers, young adults, is the moment you've lost their interest. The moment you set it as a bit of a challenge, as something where you're going to be in dialogue with them, where you're willing to listen to their questions and listen to maybe what answers they seem to have, then they're more likely to be responsive to you.
If one presents a very defensive face to the world, then that just turns people off. So part of it, you know, and part of apologetics is listening. It's listening to what people are saying to you, understanding what they're trying to get at and engaging with that. Because most people who are against Catholicism and against, you know, the hot button issues like abortion and euthanasia, their concern is not one born out of hatred, it's out of concern. You know, they're worried about pregnant women, or they're worried about homophobia, or they're worried about people dying in pain. You know, it's not a malevolent thing, it's compassionate. And what we at Catholic Voices try to do is engage you know, with the compassion behind that and say, yes, you know, Jesus was compassionate. We understand why you're feeling angry, but actually, you know, this is where your anger should be. This is how we make things better. You know, let's work together and let's show you why Catholicism is the truth.
So what is the new evangelization? How does one do it? Why is it worthwhile? To understand the new evangelization, we have to go back to the Second Vatican Council, the great gathering of the world's bishops called by Pope John XXIII in 1962. When Pope John articulated the purpose of the council, he used an evocative phrase that eventually became the title of one of the council's principal documents: Lumen Gentium, the light of the nations. Jesus Christ is the Lumen Gentium. The Church is the bearer of that light to the world. What John XXIII announced, in short, was a missionary council. He wanted the Church to become a more apt vehicle for the proclamation of Jesus Christ to the world, to become a more effective bearer of the Lumen Gentium. However, one of the major problems in the years just after the council was that people tended to construe Vatican II primarily as a call to modernize the Church. To be sure, some modernizing was necessary in order to make the Church a more effective participant in the contemporary conversation. But the goal of Vatican II was not to modernize the Church. It was to Christify the world. The modern world or modern culture can never in itself become what the scholars call the norma normans, the norming norm or the measure. Because the modern culture, like every other culture, is deeply ambiguous. Congruent with the gospel? Yes, to some degree. Deeply opposed to the gospel? Yes, to some degree. Therefore, the world or the culture is not the measure of the Church. Rather, the Church is the means by which the world is brought to Christ and transformed.
Evangelization is not about marketing. If we think it's about marketing, we're really, we've lost the plot. It is about converting people to Christ. You can't do that if you treat the Church as if it were a haberdashery shop, where, you know, every new season you have to change the products you have in your window to look fashionable. The faith which was given by Christ to the apostles is the same faith that we believe today, and it doesn't get updated, you know, every 50 years.
In the 1950s, the theologian Hans Urs von Balthasar wrote a book called Schleifung der Bastionen, knocking down the bastions. That was indeed the spirit of the times, to knock down the bastions behind which the Church was crouching, to knock them down so that the life of the Church might get out into the world. According to the image of Noah's Ark, Noah, having preserved a microcosm of God's good order, let out the life the moment the water receded. That's the true spirit of Vatican II, not so much to modernize the ship, but rather to allow the life that's been preserved on that ship now to flood the world. Karl Barth was the greatest Protestant theologian of the last century. When Barth was an old man, well into his 80s, he was invited by Pope Paul VI to attend Vatican II as an observer. Now here's a theologian who, as a young man, had said very sharply critical things about the Catholic Church. So the fact that he was there at all was itself fascinating. Barth came to the council, took it in, deeply appreciated it. In fact, he said, if the Holy Spirit's operating anywhere in the Christian world today, it's in the Catholic Church. At the end of his visit, he came to see Pope Paul VI. He thanked the Pope for his generous invitation. He praised the council. Then he asked a question. He said, Holy Father, when will you know that the Church is sufficiently updated? He was playing, of course, with that term of the time, aggiornamento, updating. But the question had a sting in its tail. He was teasingly asking the Pope, are Catholics allowing the modern world to become the measure of the Church rather than vice versa? In 1975, 10 years after joining the Council, Pope Paul VI wrote the great document Evangelii Nunciandi, which means announcing the gospel. There he laid out the seminal idea that the Church doesn't have a mission. The Church is a mission. Evangelization, accordingly, is not something we do on the side. Evangelization is the heart of the matter.
The new evangelization is the Catholic Church rediscovering its primary purpose, which is to spread the gospel of God's mercy and love throughout the world. The new evangelization is every Catholic rediscovering, or perhaps learning for the first time, that they have been baptized into a missionary vocation. The new evangelization is every Catholic parish letting its people know that when they leave the parking lot on Sunday morning, they are entering mission territory.
Okay, so we have a role to play in the culture. We have a role to transform the culture, not to leave it and run to our Catholic comfort areas. There's something about the faith that when you truly experience Christ, when you truly experience a love for the faith, you can't hold it to yourself. It overflows, it goes out, and all you want to do is let people know about it.
There's so many problems with family breakdown, there's so many problems inside families, and Christ can make such a massive difference, and hopefully when people have experienced this, they share it with others, and it can only do good. In a sense that my parish priest, that one person came and he sowed a seed with me, and that seed's gone out there, and there'll be other people now that are touched probably by it, and they'll also in time, I'm sure, sow seeds. So I've got lots of hope for church. I think it's in many ways it is a good time, and there's lots of enthusiasm around.
At the synod that preceded the publication of Evangelii Nunciandi, there was a young archbishop from Krakow in Poland named Karol Wojtyła. 3 years later, that young archbishop became Pope John Paul II. Therefore, we shouldn't be surprised that upon becoming Pope, one of his most basic and fundamental interests is the new evangelization. He was at Vatican II. He was at the synod that produced Evangelii Nunciandi. He was there as the concept of the new evangelization started to take shape. And that's why it became so central to him as Pope. In 1983, Pope John Paul appeared in Port-au-Prince in Haiti. He gave a speech in the course of which he used for the first time the phrase, new evangelization. He clarified that evangelization, from St. Paul to the present day, always has the same basic form, namely declaring the lordship of Jesus. But what is called for now, he said, is an evangelization that is new in ardor, new in expression, and new in method.
I think the Pope meant a new sense of passion for mission, that every Catholic understands that he or she is baptized into a missionary vocation, and that the character of our own faith is measured in part by how much we offer others the possibility of friendship with Jesus Christ.
One of John Paul's signal contributions was his summoning of a series of international gatherings of young people. These World Youth Days attracted millions. One of the most successful was in Sydney, Australia in 2008.
You know, sometimes when you're a young Catholic growing up in a city, whether it's Sydney, New York, Paris, wherever, there's a tendency to think that I'm sort of in this alone, you know, especially if you're not surrounded by a great community that structures and gives you inspiration and edifies your faith life. You can really sort of feel isolated. But events like World Youth Day, when you get millions of people in one place at the same time, really show in a way that no other religion can the universality and the deeply inspiring to human nature, the appeal that Catholicism has. It's the biggest event that this country has ever hosted, you know, much more so than the Olympics, the Rugby World Cup. It brought more people to the country than all those. So it was a huge event in itself compared to other events, but really an injection of joy and just goodness in the country that was just palpable. Even the media itself changed its perception of the Catholic Church. It changed from sort of being very antagonistic towards the Church in the lead up to it. Why are taxpayers paying for this? Why do we have to sort of, you know, foot the bill for Catholics? But the moment the Pope got here and all the hundreds of thousands of young people, you know, the media just fell in love with him.
There's joy, there's confidence, there's hope. You know, the beauties of the Church, the wonderful things of the Church, the wonderful things our faith has to offer. World Youth Day taps into that, and ever since then, young people have been yearning to return to that same feeling, yearning to have hope, because the world doesn't give that to you. So slowly and surely, Catholics are coming out of the woodworks. There's more conversions taking place because they see that we have so much more to offer than just what the world does.
World Youth Day in Sydney was absolutely huge, and it was all the better for the fact that the secular press had predicted disaster and received triumph. We seem to be getting an amazing crop of very, very sincere 18, 19 and 20-year-olds, and I have great hope for them with religion.
We had about 20 active youth groups and ministries in our diocese before World Youth Day. Now we have 85. That's a huge leap in a short time, and there's a number of things you could point to, but clearly it was World Youth Day that gave the energy and impetus to that to happen. I hear again and again of some of my young people who are dragging their parents to Mass. Now, I don't know if that's ever happened before in history.
I see young lay folk much more willing to stand up for their faith, be identified with their faith, work for their faith. They're to be the generation that participates and lifts everyone in this work of renewal. The Church cannot be, much as we love our elders, can't be just filled with old people. We have to draw young folks in, and who does it better than other young people? They're the ones who have to draw in a larger number.
Vatican II is meant to be a missionary council, an evangelical council, an invitation to ardent proclamation. But in the period right after Vatican II, the Church, at least in the West, became marked not so much by renewed ardor as by hand-wringing, vacillation, and doubt. In the late 60s and 70s of the last century, the Church seemed to have lost confidence in itself. Joseph Ratzinger, along with Yves Congar, Henri de Lubac, Karl Rahner, and others, was part of the victorious progressive team at Vatican II, those who were calling for an evangelical renewal of the Church. In the wake of the Council, these theologians endeavored to establish a journal that would propagate their point of view. It was called Concilium. But by the early 70s, he, along with Balthasar and de Lubac, had broken with the board of Concilium and formed their own theological journal called Communio. In fact, today, one of the ways that we categorize Catholics is as those who lean in a more Concilium and those who lean in a more Communio direction. Now, Ratzinger gave 3 reasons why he broke with the board of Concilium. I'll explore one with you. The stated purpose of Concilium was to perpetuate the spirit of Vatican II. Now, Joseph Ratzinger was par excellence a man of Vatican II. He was a theological expert at all 4 sessions. He contributed mightily to the writing of some of the major documents. But he didn't think it was ever a good idea for the Church to perpetuate the spirit of any council. Here's what he meant. Only 20 times in its 2,000-year history has the Church paused for a major ecumenical council, and thereupon hangs a tale. During a council, the church, to some degree, throws itself into suspense. It asks a fundamental question. Think of in the early days, Council of Nicaea, Chalcedon, the church trying to resolve a basic question about who Jesus Christ is. Or think of the Council of Trent, when the church tried to wrestle with the challenge and question of the Reformation. Once that question is resolved, the church turns with a certain relief from a council. Because the essence of the church is not concilium. The essence of the church is communio. Concilium, if you want, is the moment when the church pauses, raises questions about itself, debates. The church then moves from concilium back to communio. Communio means the life of love, of care for the poor, of liturgy, of evangelization, the essential life of the church. What we don't want is a permanent concilium, a permanent council. The church stuck in this attitude of doubting, questioning, hand-wringing. I think that's what John Paul II intuited with great clarity. And that's why he called for a new ardor, a new fire.
I don't want to be, it can't be too far away. Yeah.
If you want to see a good example of both communio and ardor today, might I suggest the Missionaries of God's Love in Australia.
My name's Mel. I'm a sister with the Missionaries of God's Love. So we're a new and emerging group in Australia that has sisters and brothers and priests. We want to spread God's love to all people and share with all people the love of God, but particularly we would see our mission to young people and those on the margins of society, that they're the ones that we would be most called to bring the love of God to.
We live in Australia in a point in time where we have one of the highest suicide and depression rates around the world. Young people in Australia every day struggle to find any hope or meaning or purpose in anything they do.
I think it's because the world tells young people, everyone, not just young people, that you are less than you are and that you don't deserve all your worth. You can't get any better than this, so stop trying. And so they do. And I think that resistance is just because they don't believe in their own self-worth and dignity.
When we rely on things like what we look like, passing things that will always fade away, like money and fashion, they will always leave us feeling wanting. They will always leave us feeling just that little bit unsatisfied because they will never really fill that hole in our hearts that is just longing for God.
I think there's so many other kind of voices in the world that suggest that God's not relevant or that you don't need God in your life, or there's all these other things in the world that can make you happy. And I think that it's hard for people to hear the message that God loves them in the midst of all of that, in the midst of all the things, other things that people have presented to them as being more important.
I wouldn't call myself an optimist or an idealist, but I am hopeful in a rational way because I know that that play that we just did is real and the love of God conquers all.
He is always there for us in our life, despite how lost we get, despite how we choose to get caught up in all these other things and distracted. Christ is there in the midst of it all and trying to get our attention, you know, trying to get through to us.
His love was so radical that he was slaughtered on a tree. And I think when you break it down to that hearty, nitty-gritty, this is what love is, you can't argue with it. And when it hits you, it hits you.
He's Christ, he's awesome. He's not there to take us out. He's not there to drag us down, but to love us and save us from the things that weigh us down in life. Yeah. I got a nice chip in my tooth. It got a little rough there at one point, and I'm wearing the scars right now, but it's good.
The deepest source of Christian ardor, up and down the centuries, is nothing other than the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. The fire comes from clarity about the resurrection. A few years ago, I was invited to give a talk at a conference on evangelization. I think it was the third day of the conference that I spoke. My opening line was simply, evangelization has to do with proclaiming Jesus risen from the dead. At which point, the entire crowd broke out into raucous applause. And I said, well, on behalf of the risen Jesus, I want to thank you. But I was frankly puzzled by their reaction. So afterwards, I asked a few of them, What was that all about? They said, Father, we've been here for 3 days. We've heard dozens of talks, all about sociology, all about the culture, all about the church. No one has spoken about the resurrection. That is a problem. Because evangelization primarily is about declaring Jesus risen from the dead. That's the Evangelion. That's the good news. In the years following the council, there were far too many theological texts that were soft and rather murky on the resurrection. Some very prominent theologians argued that the resurrection is a myth, a legend, a symbol, a sign that the cause of Jesus goes on. Not many years ago, a well-known popular theologian said that Jesus died, he stayed in his grave, and his disciples gathered after his death in a memory circle and recalled how powerfully he had witnessed to God. They then expressed this conviction through stories of apparitions and empty tombs. Well, if that's all the resurrection means, then evangelization dries up.
Often heresies aren't sort of, wild and mysterious. They're actually attempts to make Christianity seem more reasonable, to say, well, okay, this Trinity business is a little bit too crazy and complicated. Wouldn't it be simpler if Jesus were just God's Son and weren't co-eternal with the Father, right? And you can run that same method through a lot of Christian heresies, in the early centuries of the church down to the present day. And I think, again, by trying to make God more sort of perfectly rational and perfectly comprehensible, you lose an aspect of Christianity that actually maps onto the mysteries and complexities that we encounter in our everyday life and have to live with.
I have a theory I share with my students. If a theologian's speaking of Jesus in such a way that he can't distinguish clearly between my grandmother and Christ, that's bad Christology. Here's what I mean. My grandmother was a great lady. No one mediated to me more the love of God than my grandmother. In fact, I remember clearly the first time someone used the phrase unconditional love and explained what it meant, I thought, yeah, that's the way my grandmother loves me. She was a very powerful symbol of God. But here's the thing. I'm not the least bit tempted to start a new religion based upon my grandmother. If that's all Jesus is, one more mystic or guru or spiritual teacher, frankly, the heck with him. What you sense on every page of the New Testament, from Matthew to Revelation, is what I call a grab you by the lapels quality. These people were not talking about myths and legends and symbols and literary devices. They were talking about an encounter that so overwhelmed them that they wanted to tell the whole world about it. An encounter that sent them careering around the world with this extraordinary message. We have today the same calling. That's evangelization. The good news is that Jesus Christ, who was crucified by the powers of the world, has been raised bodily from death in such a way that the powers of the world are mocked. Look at the cross. If someone from the ancient world came in a time machine to a church on Sunday and saw hundreds of people worshiping around the image of the cross, he would be appalled. The cross was the most horrifying symbol in the ancient world because it was the sign of Roman domination. If you crossed us, pun intended, that's what we'll do to you. That was state-sponsored terrorism. That's what the cross meant. But Paul told his listeners, I preach one thing, Christ and Him crucified. Paul held up the cross as a taunt. You think we're afraid of that? That doesn't frighten us, because God is raised from the dead, the one that the powers of the world put to death. That's the Evangelion. That's the good news. That's why St. Mark commences his gospel with the line, the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Evangelion, glad tidings, was used in Roman times to announce an imperial victory. Caesar would send evangelists ahead of him with the good news that he had won a great victory. You see what Mark is doing? He's turning Caesar on his head. I've got the real good news, and it hasn't a thing to do with Caesar. It has to do with someone whom Caesar killed and whom God raised from the dead. That's why Paul says over and over again, Jesus Kyrios, Jesus is Lord. Those were fighting words, because in that time and place, Kaiser Kyrios, Caesar is the Lord, was a watchword. Caesar was indeed the most powerful figure in the ancient world. Not anymore, say the first Christians, not anymore. Because God has raised from the dead Jesus Christ. And therefore, Jesus Kyrios, Jesus is the Lord. That's evangelization. And that's why up and down the centuries, Christians proclaim it with ardor.
Jesus, even the evangelical sort of setting in the Bible, is presented as this amazing Jesus, but even this Jesus that brings a certain fear to people. And I've seen where you've described that image of Jesus, the scary Jesus.
Yeah.
Yet we have this other image that we want of Jesus as the friendly and the soft and the cuddly Jesus. And how do those two go together?
Chesterton said a long time ago, every Catholic church ought to have a statue of the sort of serene and peaceful Christ, but right next to him a statue of the ferocious Christ, because both are present in the Gospels. And that's dead right, it seems to me. When I was coming of age, there was this picture, we used to call it the Jesus a surfer dude, you know, it was kind of this very friendly, big smile. And okay, it's catching something of Jesus because he incarnates the divine love. Well, the divine love is full of grace, it's full of life and mercy. But the divine love also has a hard edge, because love means willing the good of the other. It's not a sentiment. It's willing the good of the other. And that can mean that it's angry at sin. It wants to change us, you know. So the Christ of fierce anger is also there, obviously, in the Gospels. But we shouldn't be afraid of that. We should welcome the angry Christ, if you want, as the one who wants to change us from within. He wants to renovate us. So it's the balance of the two that's key. What I rail against, and you picked it up from the series, is the kind of domesticated Jesus. So he's like many other spiritual teachers, a nice, friendly fellow. I can abide by certain things he says. But that's not the real Christ. The real Christ is a kind of strange and disturbing figure. And the church's job is to bring the totality of Christ to the fore. John Paul II said, "The new evangelization is new in expression." The evangelical message we have today is the same message that Paul had, the same one Thomas Aquinas had, the same one Francis Xavier had. But now it's proclaimed in a new cultural setting, namely our own time, a time in the West anyway of increasing secularization.
Secularism is a very intentional effort to push God out of every aspect of life, both personal and cultural. We see in our entertainment, in our politics, and our social life, that God is very gradually being pushed to the margins.
The kind of secularism with which the church cannot live and with which the church must contend is a secularism which demands that the public square, those parts of society and culture and politics where we live our common life, be scoured of religious conviction and religiously informed moral conviction. That kind of aggressive secularism, which refuses to take seriously the possibility of transcendent truth and love, is a form of dictatorship, and it has to be resisted.
If our culture is based around God, and if God is the center of our culture, then he's going to demand certain things. You know, he's not just this jolly Santa Claus in the sky that just says, oh, I hope you have a good time and have fun. And so that reality that God is a demanding God who demands and wants and wills transformation forces people to adopt a secularist mindset, because they don't want that. They don't want demands and somebody else to be in control of their life.
There are three dimensions of secularism I'd like to address. The first is a deep confusion among many about what we mean when we say God. In the 20th century, atheism reigned as an official ideology in many parts of the world. And in the West, a sort of practical atheism also has come to reign. I mean a deep indifference to God, accompanied by a deep misunderstanding of God. For many people today, God is a threat to human flourishing. Ludwig Feuerbach, the founder of modern atheism, said, "The no to God is the yes to man." The more I say no to God, the more I deny God, the more I affirm my humanity. Jean-Paul Sartre, the founder of existentialism, said this: "If God exists, I cannot be free. But I am free. Therefore, God does not exist." In both cases, you find a fundamentally competitive view of God. God is a fussy supreme being who broods over my freedom, broods over my flourishing, standing over and against me competitively. But now consider Thomas Aquinas. Thomas rarely called God en summum, Latin for highest being, one big being among many. That's what God is not. Rather, Aquinas calls God ipsum esse subsistens. That means the sheer act of to be itself. In the liturgy we say, "In you we live and move and have our being." God is not a fussy competitor. Rather, God is that power in and through which we here and now endure and move and indeed exist.
Everybody knows, everybody has a sense of the mystery of life, that it's not simply a matter of science. It's a matter of living in the presence of something that is way beyond us. And the more we can name, understand, and relate to that presence, which is God, made visible in Christ Jesus, the better we are, the more wholesome we become.
What science discovers, it doesn't matter. It tells us ever more and more about the extraordinary complexity, in religious terms, of God's creation. It doesn't leave less room for God, unless God was spatial. But if you understand the first thing about what is claimed about God in Christianity, Judaism, or Islam, you know that God is, by definition, not spatial at all. You can say, I don't believe in any non-spatial reality. It's great, we know what your belief is. But it wasn't science that told you that. Science, by definition, is restricted to what can be observed and measured and so forth. The more and more that science understands and discovers does not leave less room for God. God doesn't need any room. Believers should take heart from this. You know, when somebody presses them and says, well, where is God? If God is real, where is God? You imagine that God is spatial? You know, what do you imagine? A being up in the sky or something like that, right? And that's why someone like Richard Dawkins can, you know, say his mocking things about talking about God existing is like talking about whether there's a flying spaghetti monster somewhere. We don't see him, but he could be real. No, it's not at all like talking about that. I mean, these people they don't have a clue about how to think about these issues.
Well, here I'm, I guess, a bit of a Chestertonian, right, in the sense that I follow G.K. Chesterton in thinking that the distinctive aspect of the Christian view of God is its comfort with paradox and mystery, with the idea that, you know, the divine nature is accessible to reason, but that aspects of God himself, his relationship to human beings, our relationship to him, are always going to remain slightly beyond our grasp.
The other day I was doing catechesis with the younger children, and I said, so that I started talking to their parents, and I said, well, who knows, who can explain to me a perfect explanation of God? And they all looked at me, blank. But I said, well, that's a good start. We say we're searchers, we're people looking for answers. It's not about having all the answers, and I think that's the positive.
I think young people have always loved mystery. I think one of the great mistakes we made was we oversimplified things. There's a joke in Australia that a 1960s house is called a cream brick veneer house. It's a boring brick, no frills. People don't like cream brick veneer houses now. I always say to people, if you went into the average 16-year-old girl's bedroom 20 years ago, there would have been no candles. There are candles now. People want mystery, they want art, they want culture, they don't want to just understand, they want to feel. And that's starting to happen.
Is God here? Yes. Is God here? Yes, in every nook and cranny. God is the reason that the universe exists at all. God's being is not competitive with our being. He's not jostling with us for space on the same stage. Rather, God is the one who allows us to be. Saint Irenaeus said this in the 2nd century. Gloria Dei homo vivens. That means the glory of God is a human being fully alive. That's Christianity.
What we do need to do is allow humanity to see a life with God as so much more fulfilled. Fulfilled in a way that the world doesn't fulfill you. So yeah, I know a lot of people feel like they are satisfied with the world, feel like they don't need God, that He doesn't play a role because things are going great. But we need to, I think more importantly than anything else in Australia, is be witnesses to the love of God that you can't have in the world alone. Be witnesses to the hope that is unbounding, that the Christian hope, because we have God on our side. And that speaks volumes. You know, a happy warrior is more attractive than anything else. And if we live our faith joyfully, confidently, and constantly challenge ourselves, that witness will make people question whether they have it all.
God becomes one of us in Christ, but in such a way that He neither ceases to be God nor undermines the integrity of the creature He becomes. Rather, Christ is the archetype of humanity precisely because He is divine. In the Greek and Roman myths, the gods come crashing into human affairs, their presence compelling a retreat on the part of human beings. In some cases, when the gods arrive, people are incinerated, destroyed. Feuerbach, Sartre, and contemporary atheists have a legitimate quarrel with this conception of divinity, and I agree with them. But now, consider the Bible. On Mount Sinai, Moses saw a bush that was on fire, but not consumed. This is a prime image of the way that God relates to the world that He's made. The closer God gets, the more luminous and beautiful and enhanced His creation becomes. In regard to human beings, indeed Irenaeus had it right. Gloria Dei homo vivens. A second feature of the contemporary secular culture is what I would call the disenchanted world. By this I mean the view that what we can see and measure, the world of our immediate experience, is all that there is. A further implication of this understanding of things is that any joy or fulfillment that we can possibly experience takes place within the confines of this finite universe. There's a fundamental problem with this point of view, and it was identified long ago by St. Augustine. The great doctor of the church said, "Lord, you've made us for yourself, and therefore our heart is restless until it rests in thee." Like it or not, we've been wired for God.
Within every atheist, within every human being, is this deep understanding that God really exists. Now, we can push that out, we can get rid of that, we can try to suppress it, but deep within us, there's that desire for something greater than what this world offers, some transcendent truth or goodness or beauty. And so the atheists reject this, obviously, not believing in God, and their mission to make converts is an effort to affirm them in their rejection of God.
Even the most secular society, is not a society that's capable of doing away with the religious impulse altogether, because the religious impulse is unique to human affairs. So in the long run, even a society that seems to have sort of shunted aside all the big religious questions will find itself confronting them in some new and unexpected form. Even if you believe that there is no God, the quest for a society that does away with the religious impulses is sort of a fool's errand in the end, and that by trying to shunt traditional forms of faith to the sidelines, in the long run you just open the door up for potentially darker and more dangerous forces.
Our minds seek the truth, and they find it indeed in science, mathematics, philosophy. But we're never utterly satisfied by the truths that we discover. Our minds keep restlessly searching. The more our curiosity is satisfied, the more it is aroused. This is because the mind wants not any particular truth or collection of particular truths. The mind wants the truth itself. Our wills seek the good, and they find it to some degree in this world. In the course of my life, I've witnessed some extraordinary attainments of goodness and justice. Martin Luther King's great social revolution in the United States. John Paul II's successful undermining of communism in Poland and the Eastern Bloc. Nelson Mandela's undoing of apartheid in South Africa. We can achieve justice in this world, but is the will ever satisfied? No. It remains restless, uneasy, filled with longing. The more good it attains, the more good it wants. In fact, it is precisely at the best moments of life that we become particularly aware of this infinite hunger.
People in Western contexts, many of whom are extraordinarily affluent, have all kinds of things, and yet I'm miserable. Yeah, I have a beautiful vacation home, and I make $600,000 a year, but you know what? I hate my job. I can't stand, A, B, and C about my life. There's something really wrong there. I mean, to me, it's just obvious. If that doesn't lead you at least to question the premise that the more and better material things you have necessarily means you're going to be more content and happy with your life, I don't know what is. I mean, what more evidence could you possibly want? Because people don't need that much. They don't even need that much in order to be happy. They're made to think they do. Unless you have a new, iPhone, well, how could your life possibly be complete, right? But we're absolutely bewitched by this. I mean, I really think it's the air we breathe.
St. John of the Cross echoes St. Augustine when he says that we have in us infinite caverns. What he means are the infinite longings for truth itself, goodness itself, beauty itself. What we tend to do, John of the Cross said, is to cover up those caverns, to pretend that they don't exist. That's the disenchanted world. You're familiar, I'm sure, with that great story in the first book of Kings, the story of Elijah and the priests of Baal. They're up on Mount Carmel, and Elijah challenges them. You erect altars to your gods, I'll erect an altar to mine. We'll both call, and we'll see what happens. So the priests of Baal cajole, they pray, they beg, they hop around the altars. Nothing happens. There's no response. Elijah, remember, it's one of the funnier scenes in the Bible, taunts them, publicly taunts and humiliates them. Where are they? Well, they're gods. Maybe they're away. Maybe they're on vacation. Maybe they're napping. So they hop and they beg, finally even slashing themselves, as was their custom, till the blood flowed. And still, there was no answer, There was no fire. There was no response. There's much more here, though, than simply a story of my God's bigger than your God. Actually, a very deep spiritual truth is being conveyed. Think of those altars erected by the priests of Baal as all the errant paths that we choose to satisfy the deepest longing of the heart. We're all wired for God, yet we seek satisfaction in wealth, pleasure, honor, power. Like those priests of Baal, we hop around those altars, sometimes our whole life long. In time, we become obsessed, even self-destructively so, with these errant paths. There's only one answer to this deepest longing, and that is the infinite God. Ipsum esse, the sheer act of being itself. Many people in today's society are imitating the priests of Baal, convincing themselves in this disenchanted world that they can find satisfaction in the goods of the world. Just give me enough and I'll be happy. That's never the answer. It's the infinite God alone who can answer with fire.
Human possibility and the fulfillment of all that human beings can be can't really be had, it seems to me, outside of a religious worldview. Even though many people outside of one would be the first to say, oh, I'm absolutely content, I'm happy, I'm contented, I'm satisfied. I mean, I think to someone like that, not disrespectfully, but one has to, those of us who know that there's more than that, simply have to believe and assert that you don't, in a certain sense, you don't know what you're missing. Because there is more than that.
When you see sometimes converts to Catholicism, they have this deep and passionate fervor because they've usually experimented and tried a whole series of things of what the world offers. And they usually find none of them really work. None of them have the sort of answer. And hopefully with increased numbers, folks will see that it's within the church. Doesn't make life easy, doesn't solve all our problems, but one has the ultimate answers offered to us.
There's a third aspect of the contemporary culture I'd like to engage with the power of the gospel. It's what Pope Benedict called the dictatorship of relativism, what I would call the culture. What I mean is, there's no objective truth or objective justice or beauty. There's just your sense of truth and mine, your sense of what's good and mine. I'll tolerate you as long as you tolerate me. But any attempt to defend the objectivity of truth is met by a whatever. Now, the roots of this attitude go back a long way, at least to the beginning of the modern period. But the most influential figure, I think, is the 19th century German philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche.
Nietzsche is one of the most important modern philosophers because he really was the one who unblinkingly looked at this and said, look, what science shows us, strictly speaking, is a world with no moral facts whatsoever. That's what it shows us. And that means that the one who is strong and powerful and has a will, if he or she is able to carry it out, can do whatever he or she wants to. And that's a good thing. If you have a problem with that, you better have some arguments, because otherwise it's just your baseless opinion, one preference opposed to another. But that's why Nietzsche is so valuable. Not because of what he proposed, it's horrific, but because he forces a confrontation with the assumptions that are simply taken for granted in liberal modernity.
There's a direct line that runs from Nietzsche to Jean-Paul Sartre, the founder of modern existentialism, which Sartre summed up as existence precedes essence. A fancy way of saying that my freedom comes first, and then I decide who or what I shall be. Now, if you think all this seems a little philosophical and abstract, think again. In 1992, the U.S. Supreme Court, in the matter of Casey versus Planned Parenthood, said this: "At the heart of liberty is the right to determine one's own concept of existence, of meaning, and of the universe." What all of this subjectivism and relativism has led to is the meh culture, the whatever culture.
Folks sense that they can sort of meet their material needs and in fact enjoy, by the normal measurements, a good life. But there's a danger, I think, that you cross over into a sort of purely utilitarian way of living. You have no larger sense of what defines right or wrong in the society. You just do what feels comfortable. You just do what might, in quotes, work at the time. And that can lead a society down a very dangerous path. I think that's what promotes the sort of sense in which, well, euthanasia, what's the problem if someone wants to end it all? Or it certainly promotes the idea of, look, a woman's right to choose. Well, let's not even think about whatever that is within her womb. So you begin to make steps in that direction, and I think it's a very dangerous path to proceed down. So there are dangers on a fairly serious level whenever a society eliminates God. If you think you can have, heaven on earth, as has often been quoted, you're pretty likely to end up with hell.
Many would say something in secular academia would say something like, oh, all values and morality is constructed, right? It is all, in a certain sense, contingent, it's cultural, it's not rooted in nature, it's not given by God. All different cultures and peoples, we invent our moral values, we don't discover them. And yet, vanishingly few of them would be willing to say, oh yeah, I acknowledge genocide it's constructed, so in some instances genocide would be fine. Or, torture of children, if that's what you're into, that would be fine. Now, these are, of course, extreme points, extreme examples to make the point. But if those things aren't acceptable, why not? If that happens to be my, morality was culturally constructed by the Nazis in a certain way, and if they had had more power to carry it out, maybe they would have been successful. By your own criteria, then what's wrong with that? The fact is, almost nobody actually thinks that all morality really is constructed. All of it. That we really can invent our values. Completely. More common is that the very people who are saying, on the one hand, all morality is constructed, contingent, there's nothing given about it, are also the people who are adamantly insisting on human rights and have a hair-trigger sensitivity to the infringement of human rights. Really? Which one of those do you really believe? Because they cannot be put together. They cannot be put together. But these are the kinds of things. You want to make other people confront, in a certain sense, their really kind of assumptions and basic commitments that they haven't thought through. They have not thought through.
Might I express this in terms of an image? Think of someone lying on an air mattress in the middle of a lazy lake. And then at a distance, another person lying on a similar air mattress. And then even further, a third. They're in their little worlds, comfortable, not getting each other's way. But the problem is revealed in something that John Henry Newman observed. He said that the energy of a river comes from the clarity and firmness of its banks. Knock down the banks, what happens? That energetic river opens up into a big, lazy lake, filled not with adventurers moving together to a common end, but with many people lying alone on their separate air mattresses. Comfortable? Probably. Safe? Maybe. But boring. The trouble with Nietzsche and Sartre, relativism and the whatever culture, is that it's dull. That's the enemy of evangelization. That's the enemy of the Bible and the gospel, was tell this great, purposeful, and energetic story. We think we're declaring our freedom, but all we're really doing is shackling ourselves to this little private world. And more to it, undermining our capacity for real community as we all float on our own little air mattresses by ourselves.
The great Catholic philosopher Dietrich von Hildebrand made a simple but very telling distinction between what he called the merely subjectively satisfying and the objectively valuable. Here's an example of the merely subjectively satisfying. I like spaghetti and meatballs. It's something that I prefer, but it would never occur to me to evangelize on behalf of spaghetti and meatballs, to compel anyone else to find them appealing.
But there's another type of reality that's not the merely subjectively satisfying. I'm talking about the objectively valuable. That means something that's so good and true and beautiful that it addresses and changes and rearranges one's subjectivity. Think of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the Sistine Chapel ceiling, Mother Teresa of Calcutta. Those are of enormous objective value. Whether you find them subjectively satisfying or not, they seize you and change you, and yes, grab you by the lapels. Perhaps the prime example of the objectively valuable is religion, which means that religion does not come welling up from our subjectivity. Rather, it has to be taught. As St. Paul said, faith comes from hearing.
Some people say in regard to kids and religion, look, who am I to impose my view on them? Let them decide when they come of age. But I challenge them, would you accept that kind of logic in regard to any other area of life that you take seriously? Would you hand a kid a musical instrument and say, oh, just play whenever you feel like it, and play any way you want? Who am I to impose rules on you? Would you give kids a mitt and a baseball and a bat and say, kids, just go out there in the field and play any way you want? No rules. I'm not going to impose my point of view on you. Well, I'll put to you, anyone who's ever coached Little League, how's that plan going to work out?
The great Irish novelist and philosopher Iris Murdoch makes much the same point in regard to language. Consider, she says, the French language. It stands before you in all of its objective majesty and complexity, and it doesn't care whether you learn it or not. Rather, it compels you to conform to its laws. But when you submit to those laws, learning French grammar, syntax, vocabulary, irregular verbs, etc., you become gradually a free speaker of that language, and you enter into its world. Now remember the psalm. Lord, how I love your law, how I meditate upon it day and night. Once you've discovered God, that which is of greatest objective value, you no longer want to play the silly subjectivist game. You don't want to remain on that lazy lake of your own convictions. You want to enter into the energetic river that is going somewhere. We need to keep proclaiming and declaring the objective truth of the gospel, and like Cardinal Dolan, to show the joy that comes from entering into the world that it opens up.
I think one of the fundamental lessons you learn, as I say, is that good people seeing other good people doing good things are encouraged. And if they can see things that are doable, that are real, that are not heroic, but are heroic in continuity, they will react to it.
You can teach your children all the ways, all the theology dogmas of the faith, but when you see it living, when it's actually practiced out, you know, the daily laying down of each other's life for each other, you know, Dad doing everything at the drop of Mum's call, doing everything for us kids, putting the faith before each other, putting the faith before us kids, that really speaks so much louder.
People talk a lot about testimony, and often I think they mean by testimony a kind of formal, I stand up in front of a crowd and tell my story, and that's very scary for most people. Most wouldn't dream of doing it. But A lot of people are giving testimony all the time just by the goodness of their lives, and they touch other people whether they're aware of it or not.
Friends, I'm more than open to questions or comments you might have. Yes, sir, please.
I am actually not a Catholic.
Yeah.
And I certainly don't believe in the straw man God. One thing that strikes me is possibly taking... I agree with your view very much that the sinner is someone who is living within their own little world.
Yeah.
And that makes a lot of sense. And I see it on a daily basis.
Yeah.
What I do wonder, though, is are we, as Homo sapiens, are we so self-centric as a species that we are falling for that same trap to paint God in our image?
Well, in the measure that we do, that's a problem. So, and that's, the Bible calls it idolatry, that when you simply project outward onto God something of your own aspirations and so on, that's idolatry. The true God always knocks us flat and opens us up and shocks us into something new. So I agree with that idolatry is the fundamental problem in the Bible. And the true God is the God who shatters idols, you know? John of the Cross said the mind is an idol-making machine. It's a very cool characterization. What the mind tends to do is it makes up false images of God all the time. So the true God breaks through that egocentrism, as you rightly name it, you know? So I think that's at the heart of biblical religion, is not a sort of affirmation of our wishful thinking, but is precisely an undermining of it. That's why, you know, take the cross of Jesus Christ. Who would ever have thought the best depiction of the living God is a 30-year-old man dying on an instrument of torture with the words, God, my God, why have you abandoned me?" on his lips? Who would ever have thought of that? But yet we hold it up, there it is, and say, there's the icon of God. There is an idol breaker. Luther said that. He's dead right about that. That's an idol breaker, that thing over there, because it's such a counterintuitive move. That breaks all of my tendencies to project my little fantasies about God. That's the face of the true God, you know? So I think that's the way to respond to your quite legitimate concern about idolatry.
Some of the smartest and most creative Christian writers of the 20th century realized they had to express the age-old faith in a new way if they hoped to reach an increasingly secularized audience. One of the most remarkable of these literary evangelists was the Oxford linguistic specialist J.R.R. Tolkien. Starting in the 1930s, he composed a series of books in the genre of fantasy fiction that also managed powerfully to carry the gospel message. The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings were rollicking adventure tales, but they were also the means by which Tolkien was subtly evangelizing the imagination of his millions of readers.
I'm in the back room of the Eagle and Child pub in Oxford, and this room was the favorite gathering place of a group of scholars who call themselves the Inklings, and they were mostly literature professors. And they would gather here to drink and to converse and to read their works to each other. So The Lord of the Rings was read here for the first time by Tolkien to this rather distinguished audience. Tolkien was a Catholic, and he said in one of his letters that The Lord of the Rings began implicitly Catholic, ended explicitly so. And man, you see it everywhere in that story. The principal problem is a ring of power, which they have to get rid of. They say it's the first great adventure story where the idea was not to get something, but to get rid of something, you know? Well, there's the biblical idea of original sin, of pride, of power, which bedevils us. Even the best of us want to put on the ring of power. The idea was now to get rid of it. How do you get rid of it? Frodo. So, great hero, great military figure, great political... No, this little halfling, hobbit, right? So small that no one would notice him. who's able to sneak behind enemy lines, sneak into the land of dysfunction, and thereby make this great sacrificial act. So he's a Christ figure. So, by the way, is Gandalf. So Gandalf the wizard. Christ is also prophet. He's the speaker, the preacher. Gandalf, too, though, goes through a death and resurrection. Remember, he falls down the great abyss. They presume he's dead. And then he rises as Gandalf the White. Aragorn is the king. Christ is the king. And Aragorn, too, has to go down into the underworld, and he comes back up as the triumphant king. Frodo's the priest, makes a sacrifice. Gandalf is the prophet. And Aragorn is the king. So Tolkien was, in this really textured way, telling the story of Christ and how he conquers evil, evangelizing the imagination.
I think one reason why Tolkien was so successful, both as a writer and as an evangelist, is that he met people through a form that they were naturally attracted to, which was literature. Oftentimes we try to reach people and evangelize them through theology and philosophy and doctrine and teaching, which is good and is needed, but most people are not naturally attracted to that mode of teaching. So what Tolkien did was to say, people are interested in stories, everybody loves stories. What if I can inject the truths and morals of my Catholic faith into those, and again, slip them unnoticed past people, and so I can get those values imbibed in the people without them even recognizing what's going on.
Now that everyone's read them or they've all watched the movies, I'll say, oh, by the way, that was a Catholic story. That pill you just swallowed, that was a Catholic pill, you know? And so maybe if you said right off the bat, oh, Tolkien's trying to make you into a Catholic, they wouldn't read it. But now they've read it because it's so engaging to the imagination. But then after the fact, I think it's okay to say, oh, by the way, that's filled with Catholic theme. It's through subtlety and indirection very often that the message gets in. If you start, banging the Bible and just explicitly proselytizing, it might turn a lot of people off. But tell them a story that's a rollicking good adventure and is also filled with the Christian thing, you're preparing them. You might say that they're doing what we call today pre-evangelization. It's kind of a preparation for the explicit evangelization.
Ladies and gentlemen, we take pride in presenting at this time His Excellency Bishop Fulton J. Sheen in Life is Worth Living.
Another 20th century master evangelist was Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen. Sheen was extremely well educated, achieving the prestigious agrégé advanced doctorate from the University of Louvain. He was, for 20 years, a professor at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., and was the author of a number of technical works in philosophy and theology. But he had the ambition to reach a much wider audience. And so beginning in the 1930s, he used the medium of radio. And by the 1950s had become, incredibly, a primetime television personality. During the show's run, Sheen competed successfully against the most popular figures of the day, even garnering an Emmy Award in 1952. Sheen's particular genius was to have realized the sheer power of radio and television, their extraordinary potential to carry the gospel literally to the ends of the earth.
A cloud can hide a star, and sometimes our selfishness can hide God. But despite the cloud and despite the selfishness, the star still shines and God still loves.
Fulton Sheen has an army of successors today, Catholics who are using the media in creative and innovative ways.
Estamos en guión, we could be late. It's Caroline Farrow. We're stuck in traffic. What time does the show go out?
Caroline Farrow.
We've heard the news from the BBC. Now it's your turn. Welcome to World Have Your Say.
Hello, I'm Caroline Farrow. I'm a spokesperson for Catholic Voices.
Catholic Voices was a project set up just before the Pope's visit to England in 2010. And the idea is to provide lay Catholics who can address the media on a variety of issues pertinent to the Catholic faith.
This is a simple idea. Train lay people who are good at communicating
on how to put these messages positively, these messages of the church, connecting with the positive intention of those who criticize the church and being in tune with them and their anxieties, and then that really communicates the message very well. The church communicates in many different ways, like through its catecheses and through lots of programs. But in terms of communicating through the news media, which is how most people nowadays find out information, we've been slow to catch up. And I think what we've discovered is that this is really a function or a vocation of lay people.
It's one of the big advances of Vatican II, encouraging the laity to get involved. People forget that the church is, well, hardly any clergy in it at all when you think of it. You know, there are, 400,000 priests in the world, and there are 1.2 billion Catholics in the world.
The media were delighted to have a whole team of Catholics ready to answer.
Yes, I would actually agree with a lot of that, really.
They were delighted to have access to a whole team of people ready to answer any question on any controversy and come to the studios at a moment's notice.
Over the last 5 years, social media has just exploded, and so it's much quicker and easier to disseminate information, be that positive or negative. So if you get a negative story about Catholicism on Twitter or on Facebook, then instantly that's a global audience and that's spreading really, really quickly. So there's a need to counteract that or defend the faith or engage in apologetics in a more sort of interactive way, I think, than previously.
And it's very important that Catholics, male and female, talk about this.
And now there are projects like Catholic Voices, which have started in Spain, in Mexico, in Ireland, in Poland so far, and it's about to start in the United States.
For me, it's about actually, why am I here? Why am I doing this? It's God's work. And what I try and do is say, okay, I'm going to leave my ego at the door. This isn't about me. This is about God, it's about Christ, it's about the church. And it's quite difficult to do at times because we're all wondering, I wonder how did I come across? Did they all think I was an idiot? But no, this isn't me. This is hopefully the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit.
But this is Calliope, ST8.
I think it's very important to meet people where they're at. We have statistics that are available to us showing that perhaps 20 to 25% of our baptized Catholics attend church on Sunday. So where do we go to reach the other 75% or so that are not coming on a regular basis? I think we have to use some more creative means to try to do that.
We need to be where people are. I mean, Christ walked miles through his life. He went and met people where they are, and today we need to do that. We need to be in all these places.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Theology on Tap!
Theology on Tap is a Catholic outreach to young adults, which began in Chicago and is now spread around the world.
Once a month, young people, up to 600-800, it's incredible the amount of people that show up just through Facebook and emails, the word gets around. And these young people show up to be challenged. But, the most amazing thing about Theology on Tap is that the talk's not till 7:30. The pub's packed by 6:30.
It's not in a function room or a church basement hall or a university hall. It's right out there where young people are. It's a great opportunity for not only Catholics, but non-Catholic Christians, agnostics, atheists, your friends at university, your friends in the workplace, who really want to learn something more about the Catholic faith on a hot topic, a controversial topic. They can hear one of the church's best speakers come and talk about it in a way which allows them to ask the questions and get them answered.
For a lot of those young people, they'd say it's a huge support to them that they know there are other young people just like them. You're not weird, you're one of millions and millions of young people who love God and love his church and want to make a better world.
If you're trying to get young people, get the young people to take this on board. The most successful activism movements in Australia that have reached out to young Catholics is young Catholics creating events for each other. Good night and God bless. Thank you.
If we want to get people's attention, we have to be engaging, and we have to be smart, and we have to be to the point, or else the message gets lost. So really, I think it's part of being effective. If we're not effective in the way we speak, if we're not effective in the way we make videos, if we're not effective in the way we write, people will just they'll close off, they won't listen to us, and they'll go on to the next thing that attracts their attention.
Scene 13, take one.
You know, you think of evangelization as sort of that traditional, like, going up to people and knocking on their door. The new evangelization is taking the means and the methods that are of our time and using that to evangelize.
Another innovator in Catholic media is Spirit Juice Studios.
Spirit Juice Studios is a Catholic production company. We started in 2007. We do everything from documentaries, we have a few that we're producing right now, music videos, promotional videos, inspirational videos. When the opportunity came up to start Spirit Juice Studios as a production company, it was like a no-brainer because the passion I had for my faith, I wanted to live out, you know, in my day-to-day job.
Find out if you're pregnant. And if you are, fix it.
What if we just...
No, all right? Just whatever you're thinking, no.
Our mission here is to create content that's dynamic for Catholic organizations, but also to help, you know, educate and try to push everyone forward, because we obviously can't do all the work that's needed, but we hope to help partner with people and help, you know, move it forward. So when the world looks at Catholics, they don't, in Catholic media particularly, they don't see it as like something that's 20 years behind the curve. Especially in today's culture, you need to sort of break the ice. A kid that's going to Mass because his parents force him to, you try hitting him with the hard-hitting stuff, it's just gonna blow right over. So you need to get something that's gonna grab their attention.
And you know, I grew up in the faith, just going to church every single Sunday with my family, and it kind of helped me build as a person and grow.
Everyone has a high-def camera in their pockets. You look at sort of just social media, you look at YouTube. I mean, anyone can get into it, and so the market's so much more saturated. People are so much more connected through media right now, and so it's something that we have an opportunity as all people to really take advantage of this.
If you look at the history of the church in every age of its life, the church has employed whatever communication media were available to advance its mission. So Paul's use of Roman roads, in a sense, that was a communication outlet. He used it on behalf of the gospel. That the church right now is using things like Twitter or YouTube or the internet to proclaim its message, to teach the faith to people, isn't something new in itself. It's the methods that are used. But the strategy, it's always been in place.
This is how people are communicating. Every day we're relying less and less on traditional means and more on these digital avenues. And so if we're not embracing them, then we're dinosaurs.
First it was the printing press, and then radio, and then television, and now we're looking into ways that wrap all of those together, the way people interact on the internet. So we need to be at the cutting edge in order to reach people, in order to get the message of the gospel out.
Once you put these new technologies in very basic, familiar terms, most people see, wow, that could be really powerful. That could hold great potential for the church. Of course, the next step is then encouraging that infatuation to turn into actual use. And so right now, what the church needs is a lot of people who are proficient in these tools to help the people who are excited about them. And so this is where I think John Paul and Benedict have been particularly adamant that the church needs training in these tools, and it's up to those Catholics who are proficient in them to help the greater church to get on board.
Of the grace that he is. That's exactly
Some years ago, I heard about this phenomenon of YouTube, a website that allowed you to make videos of your own concoction for all the world to see. I thought, why not use that for evangelical purposes? So we began making videos about the culture, about books and movies and music, high culture, low culture. What we're looking for were what the church fathers called the semina verbi. That means the seeds of the word, those signs of Christ implicit within the culture. The first one we did was a commentary on Martin Scorsese's movie, The Departed. I looked at ways that evil insinuates itself into human life. We put that video up, and then many followed. We weren't sure, actually, if anyone would watch them. We discovered soon enough that they did, and moreover, that they could comment. I didn't realize people could comment on YouTube videos. I discovered quickly enough. And actually, most of the comments that came in, maybe 80% of them, were negative, from people that hated God, hated the church, hated me, roughly in that order. But you know what I loved about that was it showed that these videos got way out beyond the confines of the church. We are reaching people that would never have darkened the doors of one of our churches or come to our institutions, but I was able to reach them with the message of the gospel. And I must confess, I've got a little bit of what the French call the joie de combat, the joy of the battle. So I would engage these folks in conversation, and that was something which I think otherwise would never have happened. YouTube also gives you the demographics of your viewership, and my videos reach, for the most part, young men in their 20s and 30s, a group the church is notoriously inept at reaching. Now here's the thing about YouTube. You put something up there and 24/7, it's all over the world. Imagine now what St. Paul would have done with a tool like that.
YouTube, of course, is only one of several means available to new evangelizers. There are Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, Tumblr, and many others.
All of these new technological mediums that have sprouted up over the last 5 to 10 years that again are fresh new ways to reach people with this same message of the gospel. A place like Facebook today has hundreds of millions of users, close to 1 billion now. And so all of these people are using this tool every single day. It'd be a great disservice to the church then to ignore this new method of Facebook, to ignore this avenue of direct connection the church can make with individuals.
I think if we weren't trying to reach people across the globe, if we weren't trying to encourage those conversations and to sort of hopefully invite people into the faith or to live the faith more deeply, we'd be really missing out on an opportunity.
The church never closes in on itself. If it does, it's not fulfilling its mission, because the mission that's given to the church by Christ is to go forth and to proclaim the gospel to the nations. You can do that effectively with the new media.
I reminded my students that I learned how to type on a manual typewriter. That shows how old I am. Also, the fact that I use the word type rather gives away the game. But you, I reminded them, you have the new technology in your blood and your brains and your fingers, which is why you have to use it. Not since Gutenberg, really, has there been a comparable revolution in communication technology. We have means of communication that Fulton Sheen would have given his right arm for. This is why we have to use the new media in the work of evangelization.
Every priest can start a Facebook page. Every priest can start a Twitter account. Every parish can start a Facebook page. Every parish can start a Twitter account. Every priest can become a blogger. So the technology is not kind of overpriced or unavailable. Everyone can use it.
You can have these types of conversations with people just by sitting, at your desk, and they can be all the way across the world, and you can have that kind of conversation with them where you can exchange ideas and hear their story and tell your story. Just with this little box in front of you, it's incredible. I mean, we get emails every day, and I'm lucky I get to answer those emails. We get emails from people every day saying, "Thank you so much. You've changed my life. I was an atheist for 50 years, and then I saw one of your YouTube videos, and now I'm in an RCIA program." When I get emails like that, it's like, that matters. Like, this is real life. I'm not just like selling screwdrivers or trying to get people to buy a newspaper. Like, this is hugely important, and it's changing people's lives literally every day, and we hear about it every day. And so to be a part of that is really special, and it makes it really easy to get up in the morning to go to work.
I mean, we're small players in this whole thing, and our whole goal, and we always have to remember, is that what we're trying to do is to allow God to do His work through us.
How about Saints Carry? We got any Saints?
Oh, see, remember?
It really has nothing to do with me. It has nothing to do with anyone else here. We're just His players. We're the people who are supposed to be doing what He asks in order to get His message out to as many people as possible.
We are now 50 years from the end of Vatican II, a council that called for the Christification of the world. Unfortunately, the dream of the council is still largely unrealized. What John Paul II intuited with extraordinary clarity was that the dream would be fulfilled only if we could muster new ardor and find new expressions and have the courage to use new methods. If we want to bring the light to the nations, we need a new evangelization.
Membership in the church is different from membership in, an Elks Lodge or a political party or something, in the sense that it should have implications for how you conduct yourself in every aspect of your life, in your professional life, in your family life, in your political life if you're active in politics. There is no moment when the Christian difference should not be manifest.
Every Catholic should ask themselves at every Easter Vigil, when new adult converts are brought into the church, how many people have I introduced to Jesus Christ and the gospel this past year?
We need to instill hope, we need to instill joy, but we need to give them something of value. And I think that we do need to immerse ourselves more in the culture. If the culture's there and they're being damaged, we can't sit on our high stools and shake our heads and point our fingers. We need to go in there, immerse ourselves. Like Our Lady of Guadalupe, she transformed the culture. She speaks through the culture. And if we can build slowly a community that is responding through and in the culture, that is bringing what is true, good and beautiful and transforming it to its completeness, then they will be attracted to it in leaps and bounds.
Hey, you can do something. Get off your and get out there and communicate. Communicate that this is really good news. The world says to us, where is your God? Yes, so what? You think there's a God? You tell us about your God in a way that you actually believe that God is present and powerful. That's our job.
We will not know until, God willing, we cross over into His kingdom. The people whose lives we touch just by smiling, just by sharing our joy. And that makes a huge difference. And I think that that's at the heart of it, is like, we all want to do these great things for God. We all want to be like these missionaries like Francis Xavier and all these things. And that's awesome. And some people are called to that. But like, most of us are called to give our lives to God in very simple little ways that many people will never see. And it's doing those little things with great love that makes the huge difference.
That's positive. That is a positive silence. Even if just one seed falls with one young person and they realise that actually God does love me and that, oh, Christ is my saviour, then that's worth it.
One of the things that might be learnable from Australia is that we've made a basic decision. It's about that question of whether you retreat to the mountain or not. We're not going to retreat to the mountain. We're a mass religion. We're a mass movement in exactly the way that Christ made a mass movement, and we're in it for the long haul, and we're in it to win.
This little section is what?